good.
Thank you so much. Cool. Thank you all for coming, and welcome to this hopefully fun workshop where we will help you breathe new life into your enterprise components. This whole workshop is really sort of a nice, fun passion project that me and Freddie have been working on for the last little while. As you know, this is tightly tied to something that we've been working on at Rangle. And we'll tell you more about Rangle and tell you more about what we're doing in a second. But the end result is that we really found an opportunity to help one of our clients allow for them to utilize some of their long-standing, very interesting, very useful components in other contexts and other applications. But that comes with challenges. You can't just pluck things out and put them in other places. You have to kind of work around certain caveats and certain restrictions. And we found that actually Angular elements have really helped us work around those restrictions. And we want to share all this exciting stuff with all of you to help all of you with any of these similar problems you might have. Freddie, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? And
yeah, for sure.
Share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm Freddie, and similar to Della, I worked Rangle, so we work together. And yeah, I mean, we all heard about a design system. So we kind of compare all the great things and benefits that this brings to our organization. But what happens when an application has a set of features that kind of is being utilized in a few different apps within the organization? And an alternative would be to kind of drop that into a pattern library, but that's also known as a component library. And we should ask ourselves first, is the structure of the component too robust? Meaning, does it have too much business logic? Would this fit into a component library full of atoms and elements? So what if a component library is tied to another framework? And that's how those are the type of questions that we kind of try to explore. And that's the reason why we kind of explore Angular elements, because it gives us the benefit to kind of extract these heavy, big components and make them kind of framework agnostic. So it allows you to kind of use them not in the same context in Angular, but you can also use them in React or other frameworks of your choice.
Yeah, and I feel like, one thing we're always trying to do is optimize for time, save time, reuse code. That's the big mantra. And a lot of that is kind of lost to us for a variety of reasons. So finding every opportunity to reuse code is, I think, an integral part of our job. And this is, I think, one of the great opportunities that we have. So let's kind of give you guys a quick outline as to sort of what our day is going to look like. This is 3 hours, so I threw in a lot of breaks. I've taught enough times to know that breaks are absolutely integral. So especially, we're at home, we're probably antsy and need to stand up and walk around and all that stuff. So we'll have 3 breaks. You can see them right there. And between those breaks, we'll have lessons. The first little bit, we'll just talk about what we'll be doing overall, talk about me and Freddie a bit, allow us to be vain for a few minutes. And then we'll jump right into kind of the first little pieces of what we're going to talk about, which are like inputs. Then we'll go into outputs after our break, and then we'll go into configuration and deployments. And finally, we will go into how to utilize this in your applications. And you know what? At the very end, if we have time, you never know these things, we'll give you guys give you all an opportunity to implement this on your own. The whole process is going to be kind of code along if you like, watch if you like, try these things out on your own projects if you want to, but we'll give you access to a repository you can pull down and try to work with. And that repository will have branches for each break, or each step. So if you ever feel like you need to step away for a bit, or you get lost and get distracted and you need to kind of catch up, don't worry, there'll be links and branches you can jump to kind of just keep in line with all of us. So I want to talk more about me and Freddie. I want to kind of get into it more. We're interesting people, so we deserve some spotlight. I'll start first. So my name is Della, or Abdella. I'm in Toronto, Ontario. So I've been developing for just about 9 years or so. And I've been at Rangle, the company that employs both me and Freddie it'll be 8 years just around August. So a long time. In that entirety of time, I have been working with Angular almost exclusively. Back then, of course, it wasn't Angular as we know it today, but more AngularJS. Just constantly learning more and more. I remember going to the first ngConf years and years and years ago, I remember going to many subsequent ngConfs and meeting a lot of wonderful people there. And so I feel like I have some idea of the community that is, in this ngConf atmosphere, and they're all wonderful people. And I'm really glad to be able to speak at this conference. I think this is the first time I've spoken at an ngConf or the workshop. Who knows? I don't know. What day is it? But it's always great. It's always a pleasure to reach out to everybody and give them a look at my face, really, because that's where I'm at right now. And Freddie is somebody I've been working with for a while on my current team and project, and he was wonderful enough to want to do this with me, and he helped me with so much of this work. And so I really want to appreciate him in advance. And now I want to give him a chance to be even half as vain as I was.
Thank you, Della. I appreciate you too. Hi, I'm Freddie, and based on the slides, I'm on the left. I'm a software developer in Toronto as well. And as Della mentioned, we work together at Rangle.io. I haven't been as long as Della and Rangle, but I think it'll be my third year on May, so that's kind of exciting. And over the past 3 years, I've been kind of working solely in Angular, so I had the opportunity to kind of dig into the need and greed of portion of the framework itself, which is super amazing. And to provide a bit more about my background, I used to be a full stack developer before transitioning to and focus on front-end development. I love anything UI related, and I also have a strong passion towards animation. So whether it's 3D, 2D, with CSS or a framework, you can name it and we can probably talk about it all day long. Besides working, I love exploring the city for good food and good restaurants. I also enjoy playing video games and soccer, but unfortunately, due to COVID, I haven't been playing soccer lately.
Yeah, I'm sad. I had a rec league I played for basketball for a while, and that was the most fun I had. And I miss it so much more now than I ever had missed anything my entire life. So hopefully that'll give me some of that, you don't know what you got till it's gone by when it's all back, and I'll just really get into it. So in this workshop, Freddie will be doing more of the sort of talking and presenting the slides. I'll be hosting the slides myself, and I'll be doing the more demo code along stuff. Just easier that way. So we'll kind of start it off by giving you all access to the repository that we kind of made for this workshop. Let me see. Whoops, I clicked on it. I'll copy it, see if I can get it right into our Zoom meeting. Can I do it? Can I do it? All right. Let's see. Let me all know if you see this. I imagine.
Yes.
I imagine you did. Awesome, great. So yeah, you can always feel free to grab that link and pull it down, and you should be able to start exactly where I'm starting. But like I mentioned before, we have branches that you can always jump onto and catch up with. If you also want to just have the git clone right there, feel free. I don't know if you can type fast enough. I'll stay on here for a couple seconds to give you all a chance. And additionally, if you want, actually the slides, why not? I'll give you access to the slides too. I think I shared them. They're open for anybody. So let me also paste that into our chat. Try to be as open source as possible with all of this. So there you go. So thank you for coming again. And I am thrilled to be able to talk to all of you. So, let's start with Freddie giving us a good idea of, why we are doing this. What are the opportunities? Freddie, what are the opportunities?
There's many. So first and foremost, like an important benefit we see is having peace of mind. So the benefit of having Angular elements, as mentioned, not long ago by talking about it being framework agnostic, is it allows kind of like the consumer to drop a component with all its business logic right out of the box into any app, regardless of the framework, is kind of like a big plus. So organizations will not kind of feel so tied into a particular framework just because that one app was built in Angular. So it doesn't mean like all their subsequent products has to be in Angular per se. So it creates opportunity for organizations to kind of explore and leverage other frameworks. And if your organization is under, like the project itself is under like micro front-end architecture, then let's take the micro front-end architecture concept of breaking front-end monoliths into smaller and more manageable pieces. Angular elements will be a big plus as it kind of follows the same pattern.
So, I mean, Those sound wonderful and great. And while we won't be working too much with micro front ends, I do recommend, if any of you have had a chance to, look into them. Pretty cool. They're pretty interesting. But for now, we're going to talk mostly about sort of what to do in already existing Angular applications to get your components to play nice with Angular elements. To what are the things to look out for? What are the changes to consider? What are the roadblocks that might prevent you from having a good experience? So, the first one that we'll be working with are inputs. Inputs are the bread and butter for so many components, but they play an important role as well with Angular elements. Freddie can tell you a bit more.
Yeah, let's before jumping into inputs, I would like to briefly define what are Angular elements. So we'll start with their kind of native web component specifications. So what are web components, you may ask? And I like to think of web components as block of codes that kind of encapsulate that HTML element, including your CSS, JavaScript, all your business logic. And that enables you to use the code anywhere, whether it's a vanilla app, React app, Vue app, you name it. So Angular elements additionally helps you wrap that Angular component you have into a web component. So when we set this up, which we'll see later in our demo and hands-on work, you can kind of extract any piece of that application and make that a web component, make it reusable and ready to be used by others. And of course, whenever we talk about Angular and frameworks, we can't forget about their lifecycle hooks, change detection, event propagation, all that good stuff. And Angular Elements does an amazing job to automatically handle all that for you. So you don't have to worry about that port. And in fact, you can kind of further expose these events using outputs, to which we'll be covering later as well. And we should not forget they're framework agnostic, meaning we can just take it out of the box and drop it into a vanilla app or React, anything you want. And yeah, so one important keys are inputs. So when designing our inputs, we ideally want to keep kind of like the following points in mind. Inputs being domain specific. So let's picture together a header component with a navigation bar and use that as an example kind of moving forward. For this example, we're going to keep it very, very simple. Ignore features such as a login button with a login flow. If you're dealing with an e-commerce, for example, let's just forget about the shopping cart for now. We just got to keep it super simple. And let's say this header needs an input, and we need our header to kind of render a clickable content. In this case, we can say it'll be requiring kind of like a title, a URL, and maybe an icon. This is a very generic interface per se, but this is really good. And it also creates kind of like a contract for the consumer to follow. And when this is followed properly, you can have the same look and feel of the header in two different apps. Another thing we want to consider is kind of like the framework we will be using this on. And this is important because if I were to build like a native vanilla HTML application, I'm not sure why, but just consider this. A string-based input would work better in my case. And an example I like to bring up is a Boolean type. Normally, we can define Boolean as true or false, but when passing in as in a vanilla app, this becomes a string. So alternatively, we could make our components a bit smarter with setters, where, for example, we can create like a little util function to kind of evaluate that string to Boolean conversion. And lastly, we can't forget, we want to avoid context-specific inputs. So revisiting our header component that we kind of designed in step one, let's think about the same pattern, and we want to kind of avoid creating an input where we would control a specific behavior tied to a different type of app. And for instance, we have app A, app B, and they will be consuming our header. For app A, you want it to have a different set of links than app B. And that's normal. That's a real life and kind of like a real example that we've faced many times. But what we don't want is having an additional input to kind of drive that. Instead, we should just keep our first implementation with just one input, one contract, and change the content instead. So a good example would be if you want to do some A/B testing, for example, rather than having a secondary input to say experience A, experience B. With experience A, you want to render this type of content. With experience B, another set of content. You want to just change the content of the input itself. Because what happens when you have app C now? Now you have to code an extra chunk of code just to make it work, right?
Yeah, and again, this is experiences that we've had in our application. We often try to build things thinking forward as to specific contexts in which we need to use them, which is great. It's good to kind of think ahead and think about what might need to happen, but it can also kind of, give you golden handcuffs, because you get married to these patterns, and then, let's say the other team's like, hey, we need to change the name of our link. The person who's maintaining this component, the Angular element, then has to go in and actually update the name of the link themselves, versus if the consumer could just change it themselves, it'd be much easier. Knowing when to draw those lines can be very difficult. And you know what? It's always been a negotiation, not always a conversation. But, these are things to think ahead about and to really kind of consider. And it can really save you time if you get lucky and also think ahead in the right way. And before we move on, I'll kind of give you all a demo and walk through doing this in our toy application. I want to mention something right now. I forgot, or I accidentally removed a slide right before this one. And Freddie was so good. He remembered that slide is missing. And then he basically spoke to the exact requirements of the slide, which, what are what components, amazingly. So I just want to give Freddie some appreciation there. Good job, Freddie. I appreciate when people help me cover up my mistakes. If only you could have helped me with logging in earlier. That would have been fantastic. But instead, what I'll do is I'll hopefully have gotten all my demo course out, and when I do the actual demo, it won't be as dramatic. Speaking of actual demo, let's kind of get into it. So let's do it. Let's kind of just jump right in. Did I go too far? No, I'm still in the right place. Let me go here. So I'm in my package JSON for this ngConf 2020 workshop, and I'm on the right branch, feature 0001. You can't quite see it's tiny in the corner, but trust me, it's the right one. So I'll give you a quick walkthrough of the application, and I'll even give it a quick run. I like WebStorm. If anyone's used WebStorm before, it's really fun. It is like a lot of the work for me, and that's as much as what I want from anything in my life, just to do the work for me, as you can see from my relationship with Freddie. Let's say no. Let it keep going, do its thing. It's going to start my application up in a second. As it's doing its thing and starting up the application, I'll give you a quick rundown of the application that Freddie more or less wrote from scratch. It's a great little simple application, nothing too dramatic, but he tried his best to kind of give a useful looking and feeling application with stores and states and good folder structure and pages and styles, even using post CSS and showing you how you could implement let's go with the Angular JSON. In the Angular JSON, you can implement something called it's bigger, ngBuild plus. And yeah, we're running. I'll be kind of jumping back and forth between ngBuild plus and the more native Angular compiler for compiling our builds eventually. But I'll kind of sing the praises of this. It's really great for allowing you to have your own custom Webpack configurations. So we can kind of go into the more if you have questions later on. But just thanks, Freddie, for kind of doing this all. It's fantastic. And let's see if it's up and running now. Let's go over here. Let's get us to local hosts. I think it's 4,200 that I care about right now. Yes, up and running. So we can see a little cute app. Nothing too dramatic. We even have a little header. Oh, conveniently enough, with links inside of it for us to work with. It'll be great for us to kind of play around with that first. But we'll also play with this little search area. And at the very end, we'll hopefully have you building this on your own to give you. I'm a big believer that the best way to kind of get that muscle memory is to just jump in and do it over and over again yourself. So I want to give all of you a chance to practice making your own little builds and show you different strategies and different opportunities. So to that end, let's kind of get into it. So this first thing over here, the header. Let's take a look to see what it looks like. I'll mention other patterns that we kind of use in this application that I really like. Some of them are pretty opinionated. Freddie is kind enough to listen to all my ramblings and let me have my way. So one thing, for example, that I really, really like and really care about is something called the scam pattern with Angular. So if you know what that is, maybe I'll share a link later on. It's this idea that you can have a really good Angular module pattern if you have a single component tied to a single module. Single component as module is the acronym for SCAM. It's not only for components as well, it's true for directives and types. And what it gives you is the opportunity to really clearly define what each dependency is for each module. And this comes into play really well over here as well, because what we want to do eventually is have clearly defined barriers and boundaries for our modules to ensure that we can build very cleanly and easily and have as small of a package as possible. It can get pretty hairy if you're not very clear as to what is being put into your module, and you might have a giant package. In the end, you'll see that our package that we make, even though it's kind of a toy component, is very small because we don't end up packing everything together. We just literally require and package the specific necessities for each component that we will then bundle into our Angular elements. So to start us off, we have this little header module. There's not very much going for it. Has a router module brought in, has a common module brought in, header component and header is declared, and header component is exported. And this is consumed later on in your main application over here. Ta-da! You have the header, the footer, and we're good to go in the app component. So let's kind of round back and go right into the header module. So the main thing we want to talk about today, and in our first example here, is this header component right here. So there are a couple things we can look at here. The first thing we want to highlight is something that we'll also kind of talk about later on, is this dependency injected private service right here. Now, this is great. It works. You can DI things in. It's available in your component. You can see right over here. We have this.response equal this.api service, and it gets some nice mock data that Freddie wrote at that CMS JSON file. Well, it's all well and good. And what do we do with it? We go right into our template, and we can see nothing too dramatic. We are saying once we get it, let's repeat over the value inside of it, and let's have a link for each one of them. And the description right in the middle. That's what we see at the very top over here on our page. It's a little bigger. Well, that's even nicer. So yeah, great. It's awesome. It works. We have it there. But what's the problem? Now, this kind of ties back into what we talked about before when it comes to inputs. When we make this into a web component like we're about to, an Angular element, we are essentially binding it to the structure very explicitly, meaning that whoever else consumes this component, this header, will not have the opportunity to change what's going on unless you can somehow, change this mock service or intercept it and override it. They're always going to have these three links to home, about, and contact. These are fake pages, so they're not really working, but you can see the links actually work. And you'll be stuck with those forever. Well, I mean, that's great if you're in an enterprise solution where the header is exactly the same across the board and all links are exactly the same, and that happens sometimes. That happens, great, it works. But a lot of the time, you might want a lot of things in this header, lots of pieces that are consistent, but not the links. You might want the links to be unique and different. So when you look at your components, you want to consider those things as much as possible. What needs to be contextually different in each consuming application, and what needs to be consistent? Depending on the framework and the architecture you're using, like if you're using a very micro front-end architecture, you want a lot of that to be done out of the box for you. You don't want to really be providing so many configurations, but you might want a little bit here and there. Or if you want them to be more widely used and you want to be more permissive, you can also consider how you interact with it then. You want to maybe have a lot of inputs, maybe a lot of outputs. So in that vein, let's kind of look at what making an input here would look like. We've maybe made input before, but in case we haven't, no shame. Let's kind of talk about it real quick. All we need to do is input like so. Now this is a little helper higher order function, you can call it, that we can pull in from Angular right there. You prefix property with it. So let's call our property, header links, nice and clear. And we can type our header links if we want to. In fact, I think, do we have? Yeah, we do. Header menu right here. Freddie's already great and made some types for us. So we'll say this should be an array of header links. And we'll just say start off with an empty array. Oh, you know what? No, I'll start off undefined. I'll keep it the same. Undefined, right there. So why are you complaining? Well, you can be that or undefined then. It was saying that it needed to have, it couldn't start with undefined, it had to start with the header menu array. So I told it can be a header menu or undefined, and that works fine. So we have this now input, and before we kind of move into actually utilizing the input and passing properties, let's just update the template real quick. Header links, is now going to go in here, and we are going to say, well, instead of you being, response thing over here, why don't we just say, we don't need ngF anymore, to be honest. Let's take you out. We say ng for header link, nice and clear, of header links. So we're going to iterate over each item in the array and have that be what we use to power our view. I'm calling it whatever I want to call it. You can call it header link or item or whatever makes sense to you. But we now have this iterating. But what does that mean about this component over here? Well, first of all, we're not going to need this anymore. I'll just comment it out for a second. And in fact, we're not going to need this anymore either. Let's comment you out for a second. We're not going to need that anymore. And this is one thing that it's kind of nice about patterns like this. You often simplify components a lot. Most of the code will be removing things from this component. Don't need that in there anymore. Don't need this. Nice and clear and simple. And in fact, we don't need that anymore either. We now really only have inputs, and one input, in fact. So what do we do with this input? If we go to look at the page right now and refresh it, reload, we get nothing up here. Well, that's because we didn't define anything. It's not getting any inputs in here. So we're just going to need to go to where it's being consumed, which is going to be right over here. And we can see app header. Well, now, this is why I love it. It tells me right away, you want header links. Well, let's give it some header links. But we don't have any header links in the app context, do we? Well, this is where we basically just need to think about moving up a lot of the logic we wrote in here up into our consuming application. So I think of this part as the consuming application, the app component, because this is the part that we're not going to be packaging up. The app component is really tightly tied to the consuming application of this component. And that will be true for every place this will be used. And this place is where you can have a lot of the more domain-specific context that you might need to, power your Angular element before or after it becomes an Angular element. And that's part of what needs to happen often. We can't just, unfortunately, wrap these components and then share them with the world. We sometimes need to do a little bit of finagling. But this is a simple example of what you need to do. We go right into our app component TS. Let's just do one of these. And let's say implements on init. I'm really hoping I don't get any demo cur stuff. So far, so good. On init. All right. In fact, you know what I'll do? I'll be even fancier. This is one of my favorite tricks. We don't even need this engine on net. Let's get rid of you. We'll do it right over here. Just like so. Don't need this anymore. Take care of that. Import you. Import you. And so one thing to note real quick is that often when you import things like services or anything into a component, you think about having to import them into the module as well. But the services that we wrote are all using for roots, provided in roots. So what that really means is we don't have to really worry about specifying the module that it's married to it. Angular is really good at using services like that, or rather services that have that provided in root to intelligently put them into the right bundles when you build. So you can just declare them in any constructor as a dependency injected service, and bingo, bango, Bob's your uncle. I think I combined two idioms there, but I like it. And at this point, now we have response. As I said before, it has our mock data, which we know is an array of header menu items. So how do we now pass it in? Well, let's go right into the app component over here. You can just do one of these. Response, async. Magic of Rangle, of Angular. This is a problem. Rangle and Angular sound so familiar that for a long time, I didn't know where I worked. I figured it out eventually. Not Angular. I work at Rangle. That's where it is. But we got it all working. We're all here. Let's see if it actually does work. If it works, we should cross my fingers. It's complaining because of type definition stuff. You know what? I'm going to work around that. Too lazy to get that to complain. I'll just say you are going to be an empty array. So hopeful. I was so hopeful it would just work without me having to do anything else. Still unhappy with me. Type header menu null is not assignable to type header. You know what I'm going to do? Because I'm lazy, and this is a good chance for me to show you what to do. This basically where I'm ending off is going to be roughly where I want all of you to end off. So I'm going to just jump right over with git stash GCO workshop stage 1. I forget what I did to make this work last time. So I'm going to jump to stage 1 where it's already working. Ooh. I'll walk through it real quick, make sure I have an idea. I have a header response over here. It's being passed in async. We did the same thing, observable header menu, API service, yada, yada, yada. You can see it's all there. This is in the app component. The header component, header menu null right there. You know what? I'm not even really sure I did differently, but we don't have to worry about it. You know, if anyone else can figure it out and wants to type it into the chat or, you know, just yell at me later, let me know. That's great. But if you're stuck as well and you can't get it working all the way to the end, you can just switch over to the branch that I just mentioned, which is, what is it called? It is workshop stage 1, and that will give you where I'm at right now. And in fact, I even go so far as to update the advanced search component, I'm pretty sure. I did. This one wasn't an input as before. Let me switch back and show you. To go back to the main checkout branch over here, you know, it had the same pattern. You know, it had this ng on init. It did the same sort of app facade, subscribing to states, pulling it in, and passing in that array of options to power the filters over here. So that's another example of something that we might want to have external. That I figured, you know what? Why don't we just do that? So let's go back over to stage 1. So I want to give all of you a chance now to play with this yourself, to, you know, write, to kind of like go through things. I know this is pretty, to some people this might be introductory stuff, like, you know, it's inputs and output stuff, but it's good. It's a good reminder. And it's mostly about the architecture that I'll talk about here. What to move, where to move it, and how to move around this sort of like Angular elements pattern. Next will be outputs, similar as well, but then into the meaty stuff after that. But for now, feel free, spend 15 minutes, write along, just absorb the things I said to you. I'll start a timer, yeah, maybe me and Freddie will just riff for a bit. Or, oh.
There's a Q&A toolbar at the bottom, Stella, and we have one open question.
Oh, great. I'll answer it as soon as I figure out why you're complaining. Financial. Let me here we go, Q&A. When we are talking about migrating of existing Angular components, how do you effectively solve having multiple components in one non-Angular app so you cannot have zone? And what if, for example, the component uses ally, accessibility, or something like that? Okay. So I'm going to see if I can answer this one live. I don't know what that means. I guess I'll just talk about it. So I think I know the question, and I'll see if I can answer it correctly while I also get this thing to stop complaining at me. Demos always never work out the way I want them to, but you know what? We'll be fine. Let me just reload this one. So one of the challenges you often have with Angular elements and bringing them into an application, especially another Angular application, is that you might want to have multiple Angular elements in your Angular application. And in fact, for previous versions of Angular, this can give you some trouble. Like if let's say a header and a footer, or you have two of the same element even. What's happening under the hood is that the entire sort of like minified version of Angular is being packaged into each individual version of Angular elements, or each Angular element component. So you would get this particular issue where you would get a conflict between saying, you know, and these zones being declared twice, more or less. And that was a pain in the butt. It didn't work out too well. But, oh, yay, this is working now. Honestly, I don't know why things are playing sometimes. It's to reset the server. So when it wasn't working out too well, there was a pretty well-known workaround, and I'll see if we can find a link for it and share it. I had to deal with this a little while ago. But I'm pretty sure it's now much better in the later versions of Angular. I think now in the latest version, this problem doesn't happen anymore. I couldn't tell you for sure because we're still using the same pattern. And that same pattern is actually off the backs of something like, where are we? Angular JSON, ng build plus browser. Hooray. The solution was more or less tied to a custom configuration in the Webpack config file. You needed to make sure that each individual element, when it was packaged up, had a unique name. There was an interesting conflict that was happening in the naming of this bundling packaging that was causing the multiple elements on the page to just conflict and crash and cause issues. So there might be those kinds of issues still. I mean, like I said, we're still utilizing in my project this workaround to solve the problem. But I remember reading the GitHub error. I think they were saying it was being resolved in version 10 or 11, and we were on 9 or 8 at the time. So it could be all better. We just haven't tested it yet. But if it isn't, absolutely, the solution is some configuration inside of your extra Webpack config, or instead of using ng build plus. It's fantastic. It just lets you kind of piggyback off of what's happening under the hood already with Angular and provide your own configurations. So you can solve a lot of problems that way overall that might, be stumping you in your overall, in your solution, or in your app as it is, outside of this particular problem. I hope that answered the question. Let's see, how are we doing for time? Do we have any more questions right now? Because we will be jumping into a 15-minute break. In that time, you know what? I'll count this question as part of the break. I'm going to another question too. So I'll just turn on my timer. I'm trying to be good here so we don't go over time. And I know I'm going to. I always go over time. There's no way I've ever not gone over time. But let's just try. Let's go down. I say 10 more minutes of non-me coding. I have 2 more questions. Okay, so Scott Walter, same question, I think. How do you share Zone.js with multiple Angular element components on the same page? I'm going to see if I can find the actual GitHub issue and kind of go through that while we wait, and I'll come back to it in a second. But let me look at the next question first. Does not custom one type cause issues with default provided Webpack config in Angular on updated upgrades? Thomas, that's a great point. It doesn't happen too often, luckily, because of how ng build plus kind of works. It sort of ties into, I think, under the hood, what Webpack already allows for you to do, which is kind of take a base Webpack configuration and then add to it as a bit of an override. I think that same pattern allows you to pretty minimalistically create a custom configuration without completely having to override everything that's happening inside of your base application. However, you do still find those issues sometimes. You still have to be careful, about causing conflicts with any updates in Angular. And I'd say every single time you do any major release in Angular, when you go to 12, you might want to just keep an eye on this, make sure it's not causing you too much grief. And if it's something that's you don't want to happen in your entire application, you can, and we'll show this later on, specify for only the parts of your application that you need it. Specifically, in our case, for example, in our builds, in our projects that are tied to our individual bundles, which I'll show you how to do later on. We'll have individual projects for each specific Angular element we want to build. So let's take actually, here, let's look at this real quick. This configuration, for example, is very, very small. All it's doing is adding one new rule, and this is being shallow merged, I think. I think it's the right term to use here. I think shallow merged into the base configuration for Webpack, and it's just saying, hey, you know what? When we see any of these kinds of files, SCSS files, let's do some post CSS loading. So it uses the post CSS loader, which if you don't know what that is, it's post CSS in itself is this sort of it's kind of it's just a CSS loader that allows you to, what is the term looking for? Post or pre-compiler or post-compiler? It's one of these two terms. I don't know any words. There's so many terms in code. I don't know how I don't keep track of any of them. But basically the idea is if there are things that you're writing in your CSS files that aren't maybe supported in everything, or that are newer or experimental or who knows what that you want to use, loaders like this can read those files, and it can also read CSS files and convert them down in the final bundle into what you want them to be, which are, often regular plain old CSS files. So this post CSS option that Freddie set up allows you to have, specify the syntax. We're saying, hey, you know what? We're doing it for SCSS, and it also provides you. I'm not sure what this one does. Freddie, maybe you can tell us. But this one is. I also am not sure what this one does. But I know this one. I know for sure. Auto prefixer. That one is for automatically giving you prefixes for different browsers. So, for example, you might see in your CSS files things that say dash WebKit or dash other things that are not WebKit. I forget all the other ones. This will automatically add them all for you so that you make sure that you cover all browsers in that regard without having to actually manually put them into all your styles. Freddie, what are these two for?
Yeah, so the first one is to allow you to kind of import what you just said earlier. And then the latter one is technically adding Tailwind, the package itself, into our project. So if you can see in our SCSS file, we use a lot of the Tailwind itself. I'll say more in the component side. But yeah.
It's not the component.
Yeah. So you'll be able to see apply ML4, H8. Those are like all Tailwind classes.
See, this is the problem. I think I'm far enough in my career now that I've fallen behind on certain things, and I don't have that drive to keep up. I have literally no idea what Tailwind is. Why don't you tell us for a minute, Freddie, while I find the issue tied to specifically dealing with, what's it called?
Zone.
Yes, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so Tailwind is similar to what Takin is. Take the Takin. Simon said you should take the Tailwind workshop as well. That's a good recommendation. But yeah, technically it's a small functional CSS library. It's very useful. I find it easy to customize, similar to, what's the one we use at Rangle? Tachyon, yeah. I just said it. I just said it like 2 times. I don't know why. I just blanked out, sorry. But yeah, it just allows you to kind of reuse it, and it provides some consistency across your app. Of course, we always have our need to customize certain UIs to match your branding, and yeah, there's always technique to go around it. And there is a Tailwind workshop that we can take as well.
So I didn't hear all of that, unfortunately, because I was busy reading things. But I heard there is a Tailwind workshop, so if you're interested, please do it. It's probably really cool. But in the meantime, this is the issue that I was thinking of, and it's not actually tied to what I thought it was. Well, it kind of was, but it wasn't answering the question correctly, I think. But it might be related. The issue was that previous versions of Angular were not very good at dealing with having 2 Angular elements on the page, like ngDo bootstrap would run twice, which we kind of go over later on, actually. And that would break the custom element registry and give you all kinds of problems. Yada, yada, not great. You can see this is from 2018. However, I think people are, I don't know if it's actually fixed yet. It may be, may not be. If it is not, one of the previous solutions, one of the solutions we have over here, somewhere around here, is like you see, ngBuild Plus. And apparently, once Ivy goes out, it says they'll bring new things into elements, and we're now in Ivy. So I think that's where I thought might be resolved. That might be true for other issues as well. But if that's not the case, it could be something that could be solved another way. Maybe let's see, Angular element multiple element zone. No, it's going to here. Yeah, zone already loaded. Yeah, I don't know if there's a clean and clear solution here, and I don't have enough time. I think I have like 2.5 more minutes left before my break is done to kind of go into it. But I always hate not being able to answer a question. Honest answer, I don't know. I don't know if there's any way around that problem if you're having it. It sounds like it's not a problem in later versions of Angular, and it sounds like it may be solved potentially with the solution of having your own custom webpack configuration, or maybe not. I know you can, if you really are desperate, you can even remove zone entirely from your application. But that's a big task. You have to kind of do your whole new operation and your configuration of your application, and you have to handle all change section manually. which isn't too hard if you want to do like a on push change section and have a couple of like ticks here and there, but it's still momentous task. So best answer, I hope upgrading Angular. I hope IDE solves those problems, and I hope a custom webpack configuration could solve that problem. If it's one of those things, you can maybe remove Zone altogether, but that sounds like it's the most painful solution. There could be another potential answer, and if anybody else knows, let me know, and I'll share with the world. So I'm gonna say I answered that one already. This is a good one. Curious as to why you made an app instead of a library to share components. Well, I'm going to talk real quick about sort of, without giving away too much, there's like NDAs and stuff like that. I can't talk about our current project. But I'll give you some more context as to the exact thing that inspired us to do this. I have 1 minute and 20 seconds, so I'll talk. I won't go too fast. Whatever. I could go over as my own presentation. Who cares? So let's talk. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. There's this company that you're working with, and they have invested their heart and soul into this component. This one component is the majority of their application, let's say. Let's say it's some sort of retail like company, and it's like a special like shopping cart. And this shopping cart is so smart, it's so cool, so clever. It's designed beautifully, it's very intelligent, and it's tied into their database. It's tied into all this information. It's like authentications all built in. So it's not just like dumb. It isn't just like take an input and work. There's a lot of context in there that's not just branding. It's lots of data that you want to automatically be able to use over and over again. And let's say they have a new team that's working on that's another, let's say, storefront entirely, and they want to have a great cart like you. However, they're not working in Angular, hypothetically speaking. Or even if they are working in Angular, it's not so easy to just literally go into your code base and just copy it and pull it over. And maybe the component you wrote as well isn't super easy with its inputs and outputs to kind of work that way. One thing you can do, and one thing we've learned to do, is just, is just black box that entire component. It's just to wrap it into an Angular element and then provide the appropriate inputs and outputs to just pluck it out of that application without disturbing that main application, because you don't want to change it too much because it's still running. It's still a thing that's happening. Although, there's something to be said about over time refactoring this and creating a better hierarchy where you have like maybe a component library at the very top that's shared across all applications in your enterprise. And below that, you have maybe more of the smarter components, like that shopping cart that you want to share across the enterprise that consumes those elements. Those design system component library elements into creating that cart. And maybe have a couple of small configurations for each of those contexts. Maybe like the top of the cart has a different name because it's a different like app. Maybe it's like the Gap, and this is the Gap Kids, or who knows what, something different like that. But overall, the goal of this set of solutions, and the goal of this even toy application, is to kind of highlight the opportunity you might have into taking an already existing full-fledged application, take components that already exist inside of that, and convert them into shareable pieces. Versus, if you have the wherewithal and you have the consideration in advance to do this, maybe you would make it into a component in advance. Maybe that cart could be written in a way that's very configurable for some reason, which isn't a bad idea necessarily. But maybe there isn't that way. Maybe this is a different component that's like very, very complex and very business heavy, and it's been that way for a long time. And then the context might be like, this is an application that somebody is trying to move away from. They want to make a brand new application, but they want to bring over a certain piece of this component. Angular Elements is a great way as well to kind of like sort of bootstrap that new application with important pieces from that old one. So this is more about those patterns, not, if you're forward-thinking enough and clever enough and ahead of the ball enough to get ahead of it and make the right structure in advance. This is more like, whoops, let's make the best of it. Or not even necessarily whoops, but like, let's reuse this. So I hope that answered that question. And I'll take more questions soon, but I need to jump on to the next section because it is now 5 o'clock here, which means we've been doing this for an hour. Whew, time flies.
Della,
yeah.
Would you mind explaining or kind of going through our like step-by-step objective. Like for example, on this stage, we're gonna take the main branch, and then we're gonna try to achieve what in stage one is, and then on our next step, we're gonna take stage 1 and we're gonna try to achieve what stage 2 is. Seems like in the chat, you just want to clarify a few things.
Right. Okay. So the overarching objective here, the overarching goal here, is to take this application that already exists, this cool search app with these searches over here, and convert them into components for the header and this main body over here that are turned into Angular elements. And then we'll utilize those Angular elements and consume them. Stage 1 is absolutely nothing, just a regular Angular application. This is actually pre-stage 1. And then over here, stage 1 is we're finished. Let's actually open up the slides. I'm going to give you guys a good breakdown. So yeah, the very first part is, we finished the inputs. We updated the inputs, so now the inputs that we needed to update are working in a way that you can pass data into them and have them be a little bit more flexible and a little bit more prepared to be Angular elements. They're not that yet. We're just getting ahead of it. Then we're going to do the same thing for the outputs. And we'll talk about what outputs mean and how they're a little bit different in Angular elements and how we need to consider. And we'll show that off later too. And that'll be a quick one, quick half an hour. Another small break. And then we'll jump right into this building part. And this is probably the most interesting part, where we'll have to really think about all these little steps that come along with what we want to do. In fact, we are now on this slide, handling outputs. Freddie will talk about it a little bit more in a second. But it's a little bigger. After we handle that build stuff, we'll give you all time to even try to make your own custom build structure or copy what we've written already for the advanced search section, which is this part right over here. Because I'm not gonna make this into an Angular element. I'll allow all of you to do so, but we'll also be here to help you if you get stuck and you have questions about that along the way. That's the final part that I kind of want to help you with. So let's go back to this slide. Freddie, you think that was good enough? Anything else you want to add?
No. I'll add into it soon. But yeah, so right now we'll be talking about outputs, and let's just call this a checkpoint. So we are in branch. So we took our main branch. I'm just kind of do a quick recap. We took our main branch. We updated what Della went through. We kind of put in some inputs. We kind of let the idea marinate in our head. So right now, our state of the branch should be what stage 1 is. And if we didn't have a chance to make it look like stage 1, it's totally fine. So right now, we can just check out stage 1. And our next goal is to turn stage 1 to look what stage 2 branch is. And let's talk a little bit about output. So Angular elements will convert your outputs into native custom elements. To provide some context, these events follow the traditional event syntax, which is wrapping the payload or payloads and sets the data on the details of the custom event object ready to be consumed by the consumer. So this is going to be shown soon by Della. It's also a good idea to kind of expose events that may not be mandatory, or better said, it may not be relevant in a normal use case. For instance, exposing a dialog open event is valuable and it's the normal use case scenario you can think of. However, while dialog close might seem irrelevant to, let's say, app A, another consumer app, let's call it app B, might care and use this to perform some sort of operation. We might find it trivial to include such, but it could be a low-cost, low-hanging fruit type of thing that we could add to increase the element's value. Is there anything else you want to add, Della?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, this is, again, it sounds like we're coming off this with a flying by the seat of our pants. I'm just like, this is a good idea. But no, it's literally a problem that we had that we have to solve for. There was a situation in our application in which, we, in this project we're working on, we were really converting a very complex, large component into something that's reusable in other places. And we had so much specific logic about how to use it in our cases. And it was like, perfect, worked great. And we had a dialogue that opened up. And we cared about the dialogue opening up. And that's all well and good. And that's the only one really informed the rest of the world through events about. However, another team started using our component. We started to really incorporate into their application, realized over time, actually, we care more about the closing event. And that made me really think about what are we doing? we're not just making it so that our component, our special piece of code is in terms of an Angular element just for ourselves. We're really providing this for the broader audience. In our case, it's the enterprise that we're working with. And we can't always predict all the things they need. They have very different use cases and requirements. It's very important still to be with them and talk to them about what they need and what they want. But it's also sometimes, like who wants to be in meetings 12 hours a day, It's sometimes good to think a little bit about what are the little tiny things you can do to your components to make it more informative to the people who might be consuming it. Outputs are often things that are overlooked in that regard, but I really highly recommend considering all these different pieces, especially if you get to the point in which you have a component that you want to share with your enterprise company, and they want to use maybe in 5 different places this component. You will have a lot of challenges talking to each of those teams and hearing about all their needs and covering them all. And it's sometimes better just to be a little preemptive in that regard. So, to that vein,
would you mind checking the chat?
Oh, we have a question. Okay, let's check.
Not Q&A, but chat itself. Yeah.
Let's check. More chats. But now we're back, and we did our break. We learned that Dominion is the best game, even though you all don't agree with me. And now, Freddie, I don't remember. Did you talk about outputs already yet? Or?
Yeah. So we just gotta jump into the demo.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So I guess for those people that need to catch up or somehow their branch didn't work, we can, I guess, check out stage 1, right?
Yeah.
And continue from there.
Yeah, and at the very end, if I get stuck again, if it get broken or anything that happens, I'll jump onto stage 2. I'll do it anyway just to be safe. And you all can do that as well too if you like.
Yeah. So the goal would be to take stage 1. I'm just repeating so I can understand.
Yeah.
Stage 1 and then make it work or look like a stage 2, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And then at stage 2, we'll do it to stage 3, and 3 to 4, and if we have time, 4 to 5. But we're already kind of blazing through. So let's see. So we're now on this app advanced search component. So like I mentioned before, I've already done the busy work in my stage 1 branch to convert this over into an array of filterable options. And it's the same idea, Do you want to provide an opportunity in a way for whomever is consuming this application to kind of just jump in immediately and take advantage of the component without kind of rewriting it all from scratch? Little ways to do this are important. Like Freddie mentioned earlier when it comes to inputs, as much as you can have really simple inputs that are like primitives, especially string primitives, the better, because when you put an attribute on the actual like HTML element and it's consumed as an Angular element, it'll assume that attribute is getting a string passed in because that's what it always assumes. But there's a way around that. If you have to do an array, I'll show you when we consume it actually in a vanilla application how to pass arrays into vanilla Angular elements. You can still do it, no problem. It's no major issue. So to that end, what's next? Outputs. Outputs are really important. We want to make sure that we tell people, hey, a thing happened. So when it comes to this component, the first thing to think about is what's the output you care about the most. You might eventually care about things like clicking on a filter. And in fact, that'd be a great example of a thing that might not be relevant in our case, but would be relevant to someone else's case. I won't do myself though. I'm too lazy. But for this case, I'm going to talk about clicking on the search button over here. Right now, when we click on the search, I think it's going to be in our console. Let's figure out foo-bar, and I say filter 2, and I do a search. Ta-da! We get this little object that comes out, and it's just the filters that are currently selected. Filter 2 you can see is true, 1 and 3 are false, and the search says foo-bar. Okay, it told somebody about the information on click. Now that's the thing I want to make sure is shared with the world at large. So how do we do that? Well, let's see what's going on right now. Well, right now, Freddie give us this cool little facade that is a service that is tied to our state and can subscribe to things in our state and do things when that happens. Again, works great. And in our case, before we decided to make this into an Angular element, no problem at all. But like I mentioned before, number one, when we do bundle this together into an Angular element, we're going to include everything in this app facade if we're not careful. So if this app facade is huge and we only really care about this one little thing, suddenly we care about it all. Like we just wanted to listen to this app state update. No, we get everything with it. And number two, we don't need to do this. And this doesn't really give us the exact functionality in an Angular element that we want. We want it to be so that whoever consumes the Angular application can do whatever they want to do with this event. In this case, we're console logging it, not a real use case. But it could be in our application that we, on an event, make an API request or do something else that could be clever when you click on that switch button. But this is one of those things that I'd say is very, very different in each context of the consuming application. In the case that we're talking about in our application we're working on, we have a major button that it's clicked on as well. And it's very different what we want to have happen in app A versus app B. So how do we enable people to handle them both? Well, events, of course. So let's take a look. We do have right inside of this HTML file a nice little handle form submit function that happens on click of this app search bar. Okay, so let's jump into it right over here. It's just at the bottom of this file. Here's what it does. It says, let me dispatch this event to save this form in our app facade. Well, again, app facade's here again. So it's like, okay, what do I do? Do I remove this? Do I not remove this? And I'll be opinionated here and tell you what to do. Get it out of there. Remove it. We don't need it here. This advanced search component is no longer just about this ngConf application. It's going to be used in all kinds of places, all across the world. This app facade is too explicit. It's too specific. So let's get it out. Let's do the thing we did before. Now we take out this right here. No more app facade, and everything complains. Well, we know we don't need this anymore. Get rid of you. Don't need you. Oops. So now I don't have an ng on it. I don't subscribe to that service. I don't subscribe to the state changes. And that state change is all happening in Ngrx. I think is what you're using, or Freddie, you're in Ngrx, right?
Yep, you're right.
Cool. So you can also for that if you want to do an application, you can play around with it. I love Ngrx; it's great. I like observables a lot, as much as that might ruffle feathers. They're fun. They're really great. Anyway, so we don't need that to be a part of this component. We need it to be a part of a component that's probably the parent. So handle form submit. What if instead of saying, dispatch this form, let me just comment you out for a second. I'm going to make a new output. Brand new output. Very much like inputs. We're going to need a cool name. This is so opinionated. There's so many different things you can call this. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to say search clicked. Who knows what happened outside of that? But we'll say search click. I'm going to import it. I just auto import it. Nice and easy. Very top. I can do on it. But now I have output over there. So search clicked. It's going to be equal to an event emitter. I'll type in a second. New event. No, actually, let me see if I can type it right now. What do I want to pass up? I'll talk about that first. As is right now, this is what we're passing up. The search and this filters. So I'm going to be very lazy. I'll do it right in line with this object. It's going to be a search, and the search is going to be a string. Yes. And there's going to be filters, and filters is going to be an array of these things over here. Filter options. Is that what gets sent back? No, I think we send it back with an object. Yes. I think it was clever to make it work before, but it's fine. We'll work with what we have right now. So event emitter, add import statements, add it in, do one of these. I think we'll go there, get rid of you. Cool, so now we have this little output. So with event emitters, you don't just type it, you have to also say a new event emitter. And it's going to be the same exact thing over here. Now this is super long and super unwieldy. So if you're not lazy like me, it's better to put this into its own little type, but that's fine, it'll work. Oops, I doubled them. So now we have this search clicked event. So what do we do with it? Well, first, make it stop complaining by making this a new line. Are you still unhappy? What are you unhappy about? Okay, no trailing white spaces. There you go. So we have our output event, although event emitter, we haven't actually emitted events. How do we do that? Well, this dot search clicked dot emit, and then we just need to, I'll be lazy and do this and copy you right there. So now we are sending back that exact object that we had before that was being handled over here. So I'm actually going to cut you out because I'm going to reuse it in a bit. But well, now we can actually handle our form submit. Great, it's working. It's awesome. But we have to remember this application itself needs to be updated to also subscribe to this. And we'll come back to this actually more when we get to the next part where we actually do the building and we want to consume this in a vanilla application. But for now, let's just jump right into app component HTML over here. No, not you. I wanted to jump over to, where is it? What am I thinking about?
Home component?
Home component. You are correct, because that's where it lives. Here we are. So home component over here. And you can see Freddie he went the extra mile. He made us an actual value control access there. If you, for nothing else, want to learn more about how to make your custom components, into actual controls for your Angular forms, this is a great little demo, and he does a great job of kind of walking you through those steps, and it works great. So you can even do things like form control name on this non-input. Ooh, fantastic. But we don't care about that right now. We care about the events. Oops. And what was that event called? It was called search clicked, right? Yep, and it's helping me out. So I'm going to say handle search clicked because I'm very inventive. And then I'm going to pass in an event. $sign event is basically just, I'm going to give a lot of tutorials in just in general. I don't want to assume any knowledge here. So if you're curious what $event is, when you do any kind of event emission and sort of any kind of output, whatever you pass into your actual emit is provided to you in the actual event syntax over here as a nice little variable with a $event, kind of imitating native event syntax you might see in a native HTML, CSS, JavaScript application. But it's English, so it has a $sign in front. You know, it's how they do it sometimes. So handle search clicked. We'll make a new method. It's now in our home component. And again, the home component is contextually relevant to this application page. We're not going to turn the home component into its own Angular element. So it's great for this thing to have more context. So I can, for example, in here, have that if I want to. Ooh, it works great, in fact. I'll call you search bets. Like so. It wants to be typed, so I'll let it be typed. And now I can just do one of these, and it should work. Well, you know, minus the fact that this is not defined. This app is not defined yet. And what are you complaining about? Oh, you want a return type. You don't get one. So, gotta also include private app facade. You know, this is the same service we had inside of our child component. Now it's just kind of pushed up to the parent. That's a very common pattern you're gonna have when you want to make these things more reusable. Things that live in the child, just push them out to the parent. App facade. And now that's what we need. Yeah, this is what I figured. It's getting not an array, it's an object instead, but I'll do that later, as any. Don't worry about it. And I think I actually fiddled that in my stage 2 branch, so we can switch over and see what I did. I don't remember what I did half the time. I wrote this like 2 days ago, or like, no, more than like 4 days ago now. don't know what the 8 is anymore. Who knows? But we can kind of go over my solution before. I think I just did like a reduce over the array to turn it into an object, which is, it works. So we have now dispatched this event, and we're in the clear. And if we wanted to, we can also even console log over here, because Freddie likes console logs. Search event. There we go. So at this point, what should happen is when I search, I should still see that console log. I'll even comment you up for a second just so I can get it working 100%. And if I take a look at my home, you should be good. You should be good. Open up my console over here. Everything's still working. Nothing's broken. And bar. Ooh, it works. And we get our search. This is foobar. And we get our filters. 1, 2, and 3. Hooray. That's exactly what we wanted to have happen. So, I mean, nothing to complain about. We got what we want working. I didn't even do any sort of switching to stage 2 or anything. It just worked. I think I can do that too if I want to, but we're at what? We're at 5:36 Eastern, which is just about halfway through. So I'm going to just jump right over to stage 2, in fact. So let me say stash TCO work dot stage 2. And clean slate, I am now exactly where I was before I should be. Yeah, it's even more elegant. I did less. I did less, but it's still there. Facade, dispatch, save form, events. You can go inside of here. You'll see handle form submit still there. The same thing basically. Instead, I didn't pass it in here as an event. I just actually no. This is the exact same thing. Literally the same thing. I remembered it perfectly. It's so amazing. So we're all good, and now this component is able to take inputs as well as outputs and allow it to be communicative with the rest of the world around it. That's the crux of what you need to do most of the time with any of these things. We've already handled the third step, which we'll talk about in slides a bit, which is the DI, dependency injection. And there's some reasons why we did it besides just making it more reusable. And we've handled the inputs, we've handled the outputs. The next step will be building. But before we do that, let's talk a bit, or let's give you all a chance to do it yourself. So spend some time writing, give it a shot, play around with it. If you have any questions in that time as well too, this is when you should be asking me it. And I will do my best to answer it better than last time. Can you go over where you used the Ngrx? Freddie, I did not look a lot at the Ngrx. I can probably guess as to where it's being used, but I'm gonna talk through it, and I'm gonna need you to correct me if I'm wrong anywhere, or just jump in and talk yourself.
For sure.
So if any of you are curious about Ngrx, I'll kind of go over some stuff real quick here. So there are a couple of different things we can do with Ngrx. In fact, one thing that I kind of explored and learned about recently is their new component store pattern, which is essentially, to those who don't know, let's kind of take a step back. In fact, Freddie, why don't you do your best to explain in aggregate, roughly, what Ngrx is?
Wow. The half an hour. Never mind. So it's kind of like a state management. And for the purpose of this kind of setup, we just wanted to set 10 seconds. You just wanted to set a global state where kind of mimicking a real life app, because a lot of the applications that we worked on, we always had this very big global app state. And we thought, and we've seen that a lot of these components are kind of married to that state. So what happens later when we want to try to extract it? And that's kind of like the premise of this. And yeah, just to keep it simple, we don't dig too deep in it. We just have a basic reducer, a basic action, and just one global state called app, I believe. And that's it.
And the facade to consume.
Yeah, and the facade is like the middleware where we kind of keep things as clean as possible. So we create a facade to just expose the state or just dispatch an action for us, for example.
Yeah, facades are not requirement for Ngrx. It's just a part of a pretty common process and pattern. You know, you can be for or against it, but what it does for you is it allows you to have sort of a singular place, usually tied around the context of your state. Like if you want to have, let's imagine you have a store, you might have a customer facade, or you might have a product facade to tie to certain like models, I'd say. You know, this is all architectural stuff, so the patterns can vary from application to application, and there's no real right answer. You know, I'm not that opinionated. But the idea essentially is, let's take from the states and the store and provide it to the components in an easy way without them having to do too much. And that gives you some middle ground in which something can work in isolation and not have to touch the component or not to touch the store, but handle changes there. And as long as you keep the contract the same for the store and for the component, it can all be done at the same time. A lot of what we do in these patterns is to allow for multiple to work at the same time. A lot of us have probably experienced this challenge of working on large teams and everyone stepping on each other's toes. Facades are a nice way to kind of create another sort of silo. I don't like too many silos, but I'll call it a silo, in which you can sort of work without breaking anybody else's work.
Yeah, and let's quickly walk through, I guess, the simplest, like our simple setup, which is when we call the dispatch save form, we just call the action save.
Yeah, let's see. This is being used. I don't command like my notes so much. I don't know where it's being used. The thing is over here. So handle search, what we just made, it fires dispatch save form. So that event we just kind of passed in gets sent to here, and it does this.
Yep. And now we can go to the action and see what the save action is. Yeah, so it's just a simple save with the proper search event.
Ooh.
And yeah, I mean, that's a search type and
the reducer.
And the reducer. Yeah, and the reducer is pretty simple. So on save, which is the class we're calling, we save it into the global state. So in the tree, you'll see search with the same object that we technically pass in. That'll be the same global state we have.
This will be action. It could be like this: action.search and action.filter, but you have to say search filters. For those who don't know what I just did, and I'll kind of go over it, I like to always pepper these talks with little interesting things that not everyone knows about. So yeah, this object over here that's being written to states has, first of all, we're spreading the old state in, as you have to do with any sort of state management system, well, at least any Redux-based state management system. You know, it's immutable. You give it a new states based off the old one with a couple of updates. We updated search and we updated filters. And that's what we actually got in from our action. Action, as we know, has that search and filters type, as we see right over here, search and filters. And we can see right over here. And we can see right over here, search and filters. Basically, this, which is coming from the form, gets passed all the way up to the reducer, and it gets smushed into our state and saved. But you would have to be so fancy, or not, this is actually less fancy, I'd say. We would have to be so explicit in this regard. We can be a little clever and destructure that action object and get the properties off of it and store them as variables like search and filters. And it's even more clever. And if you just pass in, if you make a new object and you just pass a variable into that object like so, it automatically does this essentially, without you having to. In fact, it'll complain and say, you don't need to do this. You can just shorten it if you want to. And so I will. And then, bingo, bango, Bob's your uncle. Any more questions about states or in general? If not, I'll give you all a few more minutes to work on this, and then I'll actually tie that right into the next break, because then we talk, well, Freddie talks for a while about state some more, and then talks a little bit more about DI. So in the meantime, if you want to catch up, we'll be on stage 2, but also we'll give you 10 minutes to catch up, write some more code, take a bio break, whatever you need to do, and we'll get back to it. Do we have anybody asking questions in the meantime? We're talking. Let's see what the chat's saying. Oh, there's NGRX talks. You should go to them. You absolutely should go to them. They are fantastic. NGRX is a wonderful state management library. I'll give you some history about Rangle, actually. So not everyone knows this, but a while back, years ago, before Angular really had its own state management, like sort of specific system, a lot of people were trying to use Redux in Angular. And we can still do that if you want to. It's very flexible. But it was the Wild West back then. Like, nobody had anything written in stone. Nobody knew what they were doing. Everyone was throwing everything at the wall, seeing what works. And Rangle actually had something called Angular Redux, I think was the library that was called. I wonder if it's still around. And Angular Redux was essentially like, ooh, yeah, it's still there. It was our attempt at, getting you an opportunity to use Redux and Redux middleware and all Redux tools in your Angular application. I think in the end, I remember a couple people who wrote this. I didn't write any of it. I think I maybe contributed like one line to this entire thing, if that. But a lot of my coworkers who wrote this, they really tried to take advantage of and use like different kinds of patterns to, I'd say, mimic what Ngrx was doing. So at the same time, Ngrx came out like just around the same time as we made the store. And, it was not really competitive, but we did try to outdo each other, and they won. It was just better in the end. I mean, it wasn't better in the sense that we did a bad job, but in the sense that it just ended up being more useful and more powerful and more used. And the community that came out around Ngrx was so wonderful that we're just like, you know what? Feel free to use Ngrx, just so great. However, it still exists. It has not been updated in about 3 years, but it does exist. You can tell it's old because it says Angular 2+ bindings. Keeping our options open. But yeah, like, state management is hard. There's so many different things they can do with this. Ngrx is pretty good at handling this. I'm seeing an article about why I stopped using Ngrx. I wonder if there's maybe someone used MobX. Maybe there's other ones out there. Let's see. Oh, let's use services. This could be interesting. Sometimes you don't want Ngrx, or maybe you might have some more powerful reasons. Absolutely, be open to it. Don't be married to anything. This is what I've learned. No matter what you think is right and good, you could change your mind. And the more you're married to certain patterns, the less you, I think, really, really appreciate what they're trying to do for you. Often when you critique a pattern, when you challenge it, when you break into it, and you try to see why people do the things they do, you either like it more or you decide maybe it's not for me. So feel free. I love when people kind of challenge me and challenge my patterns as well too. So feel free, if you have anything I say in this talk, be like, you know what, we should do this with Della instead. Yell it out or type it out or whatever you want to do. But yeah, feel free also to read all these wonderful articles that people are posting in our chat. They're great. Any more things happening in chat? That's cool.
There's a build error.
Cool. Let's see. What's this build error? Let's look at the styling build error. Post CSS loader. Get process plugin is not a function. Let me Google this right now. I don't know what this error is, but maybe I can.
Do we have to yarn again? I mean, npm install.
Maybe.
Seems like it's missing some.
Let's see. It's a Tailwind specific thing.
Node.
So one thing you might want to do is upgrade your version of Node. If you're not on Node.js 12 or higher, you might be having trouble here. I'd recommend, honestly, if you are having trouble with versions of Node, I'll just type it right here. Oh, no. My computer is somewhat freezing. It's long-lived to this computer, so give it a second, and it gets a little bit pinwheel of deathy. It actually froze earlier today with Freddie when I was talking to him, so he knows. This computer is from 2015. and I don't want to get rid of it because it still has a nice old keyboard that I like so much better than new keyboards on Macs. But I don't think it's going to have much longer before I have to replace it. So scared. But my suggestion would be, number one, most likely your problem is the version of Node you have. If that's the case, just give it a check see. Type in, oh, so Chrome's completely quit on me. All right, that happens. Type in node v to see what version of Node you have. Oh, but also npm install will just work for that person. Cool. You built errors are many things, but not cool. Yeah, it's fair. But I'm glad that you were able to resolve it with an npm install. That's the best way to solve any problem. If you just type in npm install and solve the problem, what else do you need in life? Yeah, I'll just go back manually. Where do I want to go? Let me close you. Can't type anymore. This is unfortunate. Let me see if I can type now. Yeah, I can type now. Slides and local hosts 4200. Yes, that works. I think this is my old version of the slides. Let's go back here. Send me slides. That's what I care about. There we go. Chrome hopefully will not crash for me again, but who knows? The computer is literally turning into a jet airplane right now. We'll see. We'll see. Fly by the seat of our pants. So, on that note, I think we're good for that break. Where did we leave off? Finish that. From the catch up. Workshop stage 2 is ready to catch up. And now we're on handling states. With Freddie to talk more about handling state and things to consider.
Fun stuff. We're almost there. Yeah, now let's talk about handling state and the handling dependency injection part. We'll get started with state first. Like we just saw, our setup is very minimalistic, but in a real life, I guess, application is going to be a lot more robust than that. And the most challenging part of all this is kind of determining which slice of your application state should be external and which one should be internal to the component that you're kind of extracting. And one way to kind of determine this is kind of the way we see is that any app-specific context, it should be external. And for internal, we should only keep what's relevant to the component only. And that's what Della showed just briefly with the outputs. Now, if the state is right user-defined, we could convert this into an input, which will make this more reusable right out of the box, which is true, which we kind of saw, but we'll see a little bit more moving forward. Now, relying on input and replacement of some internal state is a great alternative to kind of ensure reusability. In order to keep this kind of simple, we're not going to get into a more architectural discussion such as micro front-end architecture and its relationship to state and web components. Maybe another concern you have in mind right now is, what if I just want a component that works right out of the box, right? I don't need so many inputs. And an excellent way to kind of compromise for this is to have default values for as many inputs as you find reasonable. And lastly, we kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, a local state solution that works well with Angular elements is the Ngrx component store, as it helps kind of isolate those slices of specific states and ties it into a component feature rather than a single global state like we did in our setup, for example.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I love the component store when we're working with it. A coworker of ours suggested it in our experience of we factor things out. And yeah, it was really great. It really sort of gave you a lot of the opportunities that you get with a state management system, like Ngrx, which could be a lot of things. It could be over the top if you're not careful. But it also gave you isolation. You know, one of the big challenges often is that with these stores in the state management solutions, you know, you want to have like your effects or your ethics or whatever they're called, where you handle this asynchronous data flow with your actions. And you want to have your selected, you want to have your reducers, and you want to have all these things. But you want to tie them to the component specifically in our context. So it lets you do that. It lets you have all those things in the same file, in different files. It lets you have some flexibility in how you architect it out, but it gives you the sort of patterns that other people like when it comes to state management tied to a component specifically, which really, really does make a lot of sense when it comes to something like this. When we're working with components that we want to have be very intelligent and often have their own API requests under the hood, or have all this asynchronous logic happen under the hood without, managing it entirely from the consuming application. There's always going to be room to be flexible here and make it so the consuming application handles some of that state, maybe in all the state. But if you're doing all the state, you might want to think of this more as if you would a component library or a design system. And on top of that, Angular is great at writing component libraries and design systems in lots of different ways. One of them being Angular elements, and that makes sense, especially if you want to consume this outside of Angular context. But if you're using this only in Angular context, you might just want to be a simple plain component. That's just an Angular component you use in other Angular components. So balance all those thoughts in your head. Really, what I find is often the more state I want to live inside the component, the more I want it to be intelligent, the more I want to consider it as a different, separate piece of code or a different kind of component than I would my component library component. This is something I want to be more meaty and smart and intelligent. And with that comes challenges and opportunities, and Angular Elements really kind of plays well with this, and so does Component Store. And this kind of also touches on dependency injection. We talked about this a little bit when we showed it off a little bit when it comes to like providing facades and other things inside your components, and the challenges you might have. And Freddie, let's get into it. What do you feel? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question, and yeah, I think this is technically a last portion before the mini break and catch-up session, so we're almost there. But one thing to kind of keep in mind when it comes to handling dependency injection is when we bundle an Angular element, everything in the dependency tree is included, and we need to be quite cautious of how we use dependency injector services. Sometimes it might be unnecessary to kind of inject entire service just to get access to a value. So let's quickly picture a service that handles our application at global Ngrx state, and we're exposing some sort of config. So what we showed earlier, that's a perfect example as well. Now let's imagine this being injected into multiple of our components, and that we're using this just to get one config value. If this is injected as a dependency into our Angular element component, it'll become very difficult to kind of detangle. And additionally, it's going to bring a lot of them want to code to our bundle, increasing, of course, the bundle size. So how can we solve this? We can create an input that allows the consumer to kind of pass the value instead. By doing so, we move that dependency injection of this app-specific service into a location outside of the Angular element. It also opens up the component to be a little bit more or even more flexible. Take, for example, that this value that we're trying to get was a title. The title that somehow changed through an event, and we got this from the DI service. Now, that's a lot of code just to get one value. Now, since we pull it out from an internal DI into an input, now the consumer will be able to pass in that value, any value they want technically, and kind of control that at its own discretion per se.
Yeah, and that's a great way to think about it. There's a lot of discussions you can have around what you want to have the consuming application have power over. But a lot of the time, things like a title, probably the exact kind of thing you want to control over, or it could be something very subtle, very little. There's so much variation in what you want in terms of how you want things to consume these components. But I'd say that if you can find opportunities also to decrease your bundle size, that could be a little bit of a push to move in one direction or the other. Making this a really small bundle is fantastic for any consuming applications, because you can put it on a CDN if you want to and download it right into your application and have it be tiny, and then that would be amazing. Or you can have it, again, just be a pure JS file living in an assets folder, and that'll be nice and tiny. Finding ways to make it as small as possible can really, really help in a variety of things. So, another quick pseudo break. We're going to jump into the stage 3, which is one of the more interesting parts of this whole thing. But I want to answer a Q&A question first. Let's open it up, if it'll let me open it up. Here we go.
There you go.
Oh, Alien Xenomorph is quite a good monster. I can't believe Jaws beat out Godzilla, though. Ugh. Godzilla's my favorite. My favorite's not winning at all, but I appreciate it. The Xenomorph is a really terrifying monster, and I won't watch Aliens again because it's too scary for me. I like Godzilla because I can watch the Orm again. I'm like, you know what? This is a cool monster. It breathes fire. The Xenomorphs they have double mouths and they drool way too much. It's very unfortunate.
At the risk of showing my age, I read the novelization of Alien back in 1977 before I saw the movie. I was too young to see the movie.
Are you like those hipsters who say, oh, I don't watch Game of Thrones. I read it. Like me, I actually read Game of Thrones. I read The Song of Ice and Fire, and I have not watched any of the series besides season 1 and part of 2, I think. Were you the same way? Did you never watch Alien?
Never. I've seen Alien plenty of times, but no, I have never seen a complete episode of Game of Thrones, nor have I read the books.
So you know what? You're less of a hipster than me. I feel like I have so much time invested in the books already. I read them a lot when I was younger in high school. That watching the show again would be like just doubling up. It's such a long series of books already. The show is so long. I don't have that much time. I wish I had that kind of time. I don't. I need something new and something different. So I just rewatch Modern Family 14 times in a row. That's what I do instead.
That's the only thing I miss from my commute is I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And it's hard to do now. But anyway, you got a question sitting there. It looks like some of your attendees would like to get back to the presentation. So I'm gonna slink off into the background again.
Cool. So we have listen. Look, I'll read it out loud first, and then I'll add my comments. In general, it's more efficient to pass observables instead of values with async, due to one more re-render when using async. But I suppose this is not doable in Elements, right? On the other hand, observable is general pattern, not RxJS specific. And as long as it complies with the interface, it's still just JavaScript, right? So yeah, if you want to have a very explicit interface that says pass me in observables into my inputs, you can, if you really want to, have that work out. You can have it so that you pass an observable directly into your input and have it under the hood handle your subscriptions and your updates as whenever you want to. And like it's mentioned that it can be more efficient. It's like one less check, because when you async pipe into a template that's passed into a component, it does an update, and then inside the component itself, in its template, there's an update as well. If you pass the observable all the way through, the object does not change. So there's no update in the check on the top level of it, but the template underneath, if it's tied into observable, will update. I'm not particularly picky on this, and in fact, I kind of like the pattern of not passing observables in too much. It can be challenging for like testing, and it can be challenging for cases like this, for example, like when you want to use it in other places that don't have observable context as well. However, I do think that it's a viable, intelligent pattern, so I have no ill will towards it. And to that point, yeah, if you match the interface of an observable and you inform the consumer of this application and say, hey, this input needs it to be an observable or something that looks like an observable, that'll work out fine. But I would say that like any sort of shareable component, I always err on the side of making it as easy as possible to consume. So, if you don't want your teammates to hate you, consider maybe in some cases not having that passed in. If you feel like there might be an issue and they're using it in like a pure Vanilla.js application, and now they have to write their own like mock observable or use import RxJS or import, what was the one that back in the day I used? Bacon.js. That was an observable pattern as well. I think it's a slightly different pattern, but you can do it any way you want to. But this ties into the overall sort of point. The consuming application does have to adhere to that contract. So if you really want to be efficient, if it's very important, you can be a little more explicit and say, you know what, give me an observable or else. Or if it's not that big of a deal, just take whatever you can. So this is wrong. Don't jump to stage 3 yet. Don't look at it. I'm covering my screen, but I realize you guys can see that through. Stage 3 is actually at the end of this configuration option. So you can, if you really want to, if you don't want to do configuration manually and sort of watch me do it, you can pull it in advance. That's fine. I'm not picky here. And this is the place that's most likely to have me forget a step because it's the thing you do like the least often. So I always forget a step, but let's kind of walk through it. I even made slides to hopefully remind me of everything I need to do. The first thing I did was ng add Angular elements. In fact, I like to do npx because if you don't know what that is, npx allows you to avoid the global installation of a CLI tool. And in fact, what it will do is it'll look inside of your current package, your current folder, and see if there's anything in that node modules that can be used instead. So in our case, for example, the Angular CLI will exist inside of our internal module, our internal folder, and we won't have to actually go out to a global and say, give me your CLI information. The problem with that is it'll always be out of date. Like the global CLI could be like 6.3 and the internal one could be 7.3. And it's like, this doesn't match. It'll complain. It'll be really weird. So I honestly recommend as much as possible use npx. In fact, later on, in I think stage 4, I start just using npx at you, and you just have to kind of go with it. So don't worry about it too much. But yeah, npx ng add Angular elements. I don't think I need to do that right now, but let me just double check. Let's see.
So quick question, do we have to install npx or ng CLI in order to get access to it?
So npx is just now a part of Node. It just exists in Node. I think after Node 8 or 7 or something like that, npx was packaged in. So it's just a part of how Node handles like shorthands or intelligently deciding where to get a package. And then when you do that, the ng, so it's actually, a step further with npx is that, let's say you don't actually have an internal ng tool inside of your application or inside of your folder that you're in right now. What it'll do normally is if you say npx ng, like on this right here, if I said npx ng, it'll say, cool, I'm gonna look for inside of your folder in here, in your node modules over here, for any of these tools that use ng. And in fact, the Angular CLI, it uses ng. So I have it, it's fine. But if I didn't have it, what it would do is say, I don't know what this is, I can't find it anywhere, but I think there is actually a library for me to install, and it will install it for you temporarily into your local cache, not permanently. Run whatever needs to run that one time, and you're good to go. And then once you like, I don't know what you do to clear the cache. Eventually, it'll get removed from your cache, and you have to install it again. So if you don't like to have too many things installed in your global npm registry, which I hate doing myself, especially with NVM, if you don't know what NVM is, I recommend it. NVM is a great way to install different versions of Node. Node Version Manager. Great way if you had to, like, in one project to work in Node 8, and another one is Node 15. You don't have to worry about it. You can just literally switch per project very easily. And when you do that, though, you kind of create these new instances of your Node version in your application. And you can, if you want to, move your globals from one to the other, but it's a little cumbersome. And who needs globals? Have as little as possible, and npx helps you with that. So back to our point. npx ng add Angular elements. Oh, God, I hope I don't mess this up. ng add Angular /elements. Can I make this bigger or small? I make the screen bigger, but I guess that's as it gets. So this is like an npm install. Yeah, you do what you need to do. Oh, I said no. So it's going to actually install it first, but because I'm using ng add is a part of the Angular CLI, it handles a couple of other things for you as well. Number one, with Angular elements, which is what you need to actually create your Angular element packages, you're going to need actually a bit more. You'll see over here, right here, it says, I'm including this document register element as a dependency, and I'm adding it to your particles for you automatically back. It's doing all this work for me. Again, I love them to do work for me. I'm updating your package JSON and updating this particle TS file. That's what this is doing over here. Let's take a look at that real quick, just so we're not surprised by anything. We go over into our package JSON first. We'll see Angular elements, but also document register element. Did it for you. And then if we look at our Angular JSON, no, wait, not that one. Polyfill TS. So this polyfill file, which is, if you don't know what polyfills are a way for, sometimes there are things that you want to use that aren't supported in every browser yet. Best way to describe it. One of the best examples was Fetch. A couple years back, Fetch was only kind of coming into play. It was available in some browsers, not in others. But people really want to use Fetch. It was just like the way you got requests. That wasn't Axios or some other big library to get requests. So a polyfill for Fetch would sort of fake it for you. You installed it, you had it in your dependency tree, and you had it in your application in your final build as well, in your final bundle. And what it would do for you is say, whenever in your application you were to call Fetch, if it doesn't already exist on the window object, which is the global object, I'll use this cool fake Fetch function instead. And it works the same way, same contract, so you can just keep working like it was always there. It's rarely as efficient as the actual base native version, but it saves you trouble with support across different browsers. You can see this polyfill, it's actually really interesting. You can read through all the polyfill information. It's wonderful stuff. This is commented out when they stopped supporting IE11, I'm pretty sure. They're like, you know what? Don't need it anymore. This is only, you need it only if you're using, I think, web animations. More here. This is the Zone.js polyfill, essentially. I think there's things under the hood that Zone.js required that aren't available in all browsers still. But this is the one we just added in. Document register elements. And now this is really for helping you work around the process of registering a new custom element into your document, like your document object that exists on every browser. When you register an element, you're basically saying, hey, app, I know that this is not a div or a span that you're used to seeing, but it's a thing. It's a real element. And you may not have all the tools to know how to interact with them. I'm going to help you out. So it's a great polyfill for browsers that don't normally handle it. But as web components become more and more part of an expected spec, it's more and more supported by browsers, I imagine this will be less and less required in the future. Still, let's be safe. Let's add them in, and we're good to go. So we did that. Oh, I even looked notes to remind me to talk about it. You notice the new packages and the addition of polyfills. You did notice that, I hope. And then main TS. Now we get to the meat of this. So let me go to the header. And I'll also talk about one thing I noticed and I learned. One shortcoming of Angular Elements that I learned about the hard way preparing for this whole thing. But we'll get to it in a second. So what is main TS? So the main TS file is a bit of a black box to me, to be honest. Let's take a look at it. We have a couple of things in here. We import a couple of things. We import our app module. We import environmental variables. We import this enable prod mode function that exists in Angular, and this platform browser dynamic renderer that we kind of more get. Renderer or bootstrapper, I guess you would say. Yeah, right here, where we bootstrap our app module, and this is how we start our application. If you use React, it's kind of like the React DOM.render kind of part of the application. It's the sort of the tree that's going to end up generating everything else for you. So we, in this case, an application app module is our tree top, and everything else below it will render afterwards. However, in our pattern that we'll be teaching you about here, and what we're talking about here, is this idea of creating separate trees for each of our individual modules that we render. Modules that we render being modules associated with each individual component that we want to render into an Angular element. And this is why I mentioned that the scan pattern, the single component as module. Let me actually even share that before I forget. Let me just go in here. Scan pattern Angular. Remember this is, I've read this like 14 times. So this is the place where it all started for me. I'll share this right into the chat. I have a question too. I'll get to it in a second. Let's see. I've been in pajamas since March 2020. I feel you. I put on a shirt and everything for this, and that was really hard for me. My laundry though is much easier. That's the one thing I've noticed. So I hear you. But yeah, this is a great article that talks about sort of scam pattern and why it's great and why it's cool and what it does, I could talk about it forever. I can make a whole workshop about that, in fact, if I wanted to, but I won't. I promise. We only have 30 minutes left. So let's get through it. So we have this main TS file. This main TS file is something we need to replicate for each of our individual modules that we have associated with each of our individual builds. So let's go into it. Let's go right into our header. We want to make our header its own bundleable, buildable thing. Now, the first thing I want to do is, you can do some different ways. You make a function to, I'm not going to do this for you. In fact, I'll do it for you right now. I'll make a function. I'm going to say export const main if buyer is what I'll call it. All it's going to do is expect an Angular module. And it's going to do one of these. Just like that. Actually, you know what? No, this is too much. I was going to walk through this and talk about it a lot and be clever, but I realized that I don't want to risk any demo curse stuff so close to the end of my demo. So I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to just literally copy and paste this. That's what I'll do instead. I'm going to give you a brand new separate header main file right here. Header.main.ts. That's what I'll call it. Do one of these, except instead of this, you gotta go up higher. I think that's right. Or one more. Yeah. So the app module, I care about the header module. Now I have a couple options here. The first thing to think about when you do this is, do I want to use the same header module that I have here and I use in my current application, or do I want to have a separate one that's specifically going to be required for our Angular element bundling? Honestly, there's no right answer here. Maybe there is, actually. I just haven't figured it out yet. I do find that I like to keep it separate because I can have some of the more complex and element bundling specific terminology inside of one over the other. But for the sake of expediency right now, I'll just do it in this one. And then I think you'll see in stage 3, I have it separate. So what we'll do is first implement ng bootstrap. Please don't freeze on me. Oh, thank God. Do bootstrap. ng do bootstrap, or it's just called, it's called do bootstrap. Right? Yes, I found it. Ooh. And then right over here, I just say, if I'm lazy, I'll make it do it for me. No, it doesn't want to do it for me. I'll just do it myself.
You have a typo.
Where?
Implements.
That's why. It doesn't know what I'm talking about. Now it's better. Implement all members. Yeah, give me one of them. Cool. So now we have this ng do bootstrap. We don't actually need to do anything inside of it, I don't think. I think we just got to do one of these. I actually forget the exact syntax for this. I'm going to cheat real quick. Don't look. Let's see, git stash GCO workshop stage 3. See, this is what I talk about. I always forget the syntax here. Where are we? Loading. Still loading. There we are. You can see I made my own main file over here, and I actually did one of those. And I have this. Oh, it's in a do bootstrap. I forgot about that. Okay, I'll just copy this real quick. I'll go back to stage 2. You guys can see anything at all. GCO, oh sorry, git stash apply. And like magic, we're back here. So what am I actually going to do over here? I need to do one of these. So 2 things. The constructor needs to be included, and in that constructor we need to have the injector. This is really just so. Honestly, I'm not really sure what it's for. I think what it's really for is to help handle the process of binding all the inputs and outputs to your application as a whole. The injector handles also the dependency injection for you in your application. So you need it in part of this whole create custom element method, which comes in from, if we import it, our Angular elements. So Angular elements provide you this method, and you pass it in the component that you want to actually, turn into an Angular element. You just give it this injector with this little this injector from your private reference, and you do this important piece right over here. Custom elements that define. Now, this you'll see is not coming in from anywhere. However, this is part of that whole polyfill thing. You might not have this in your browser, whatever it may be. So you need to use custom elements that define after you bring the polyfill, and then you can define the special element that we're going to call header element. No problem. And again, you pass in this element over here, which is what you get after you do all of this. You do all that, you get an element, pass it in here, bingo, bango. What this is doing for you is actually what Freddie mentioned before, when Angular automatically handles the bindings for you for having outputs and inputs communicate well with the outside world. This is what it's doing for you. It's kind of getting that process all set up for you. And it's now assigning that to a browser listenable element called header element, and you're basically good to go. At this point, we got most of what we need. For the sake of expediency, I'm going to actually jump right into stage 3 properly, because we have a half an hour. Git stash. And there's not much left. The last step would be stage 3. Right inside of our Angular JSON. So I'm going to do this thing, index, little engine that could. Oh, indexing positive checkout. I finished checking out. You can keep indexing. Continue. That's fine. Let me jump right over into Angular JSON. I think it's fine now. I think it's here. Is it? Oh. No, it was not. And I think we're back. Angular JSON. See, my computer, I've been telling you, it's at the end of its life cycle. It's been around for a long time. It doesn't have much left in it. However, it did it. We're here. So I'm going to go over this real quick. It's a lot. So I'll skip over the things that are not super relevant. So if we don't already know, Angular JSON is somewhat new. I think it was introduced in Angular 6 or 7 or something along those lines. It allows you to configure a lot more about how your Angular application is being built and bundled and served, et cetera, but also create multiple different projects in one repository, essentially. And why this is useful for us is that while we use this right now for handling our build with our Webpack configuration and all that inside of our actual main application, we can create a separate one specifically. Let me just minimize it. It's so big. Specifically for our header element. Call it whatever you like. I'm calling it a header element. And now you'll notice a couple of things that are different here. Like, for example, I mentioned that I'm going to use the Angular Dev Kit build Angular browser native system for this. And you don't have to. You can use the build plus. And in fact, with that, you have a benefit, which if I have time, it's on stage 5, I'll talk about, which is essentially grouping the build into a single file. Very nice, very clean, very easy. You can do a couple different ways as well, but we'll get to it later. So yeah, you have our builder. We're going to build this whole thing into this folder right here, dis/header element. Name whatever you want. You just have to tell essentially where you want to output it. This is where it gets really interesting when it comes to how you actually want to deploy. If you have this thing that's building a lot of different components, you might want to have a very particular deploy script that goes into a folder and says for each of the child folders, deploy it as a package, or you want to do a namespace package. You want to do so many different things. I was going to spend more time on this as well because I have time, but I think I won't have a chance to really go into deployments. But you have opportunities here. And I'm sure there are great tutorials out there that can really talk about clever ways to deploy. But we also can have our main, and you can see over here, that main folder I made separately. It's under source app components header elements.main. We have our polyfill, which we need to include because, in this case, for example, we are using that define, what's it called? Define elements. Yeah, custom elements define, which may not be available in certain browsers. And we have a tsconfig. I like to make my own custom tsconfig. That was the last step that I'll just skip for now. You don't have to, but it's a nice way to kind of delineate certain things because the tsconfig can really power a lot of what you are informing in your configuration. For example, you might want to include the main that you have that's custom, that's only for the case of building this particular header, Angular module header inside of your main tsconfig. So I just extend the one that we have in our main, and I include the things that are relevant inside of this one in this file, and you're good to go. You can be more explicit, more clear, more careful about it, but who has time for that? So you can specify the build, AOT. I say output hashing none. Output hashing gives you, if you ever see a build that says main.56G1327, that's like a long, weird set of characters, .js, that's a hash that helps a lot of browsers know about changes to your actual bundle. Useful a lot of time, but I don't need it right now. Right now, I'm just not going to show it. It's really good for caching. Right now, I just want to kind of clearly show you what's being built, so I'm going to take it out. But all this will be customized very, very explicitly, very specifically for whatever you're trying to do. Your budget, it's all there. So I really recommend creating separate projects for each individual Angular element that you want to bundle when you pull it out of your main application. And this is also a great way to start the process, if you want to, of delineating your actual main application from these pieces that are going to be shared with the rest of the world. If you ever wanted to, over time, move this further and further out of your application, maybe into its own repo or to its own folder, you can have a better experience if you kind of follow this pattern. So that's essentially it. The important things are the builder, the output path, the indexes I'll use the same as the other one, the main TS file, the polyfill files, and the tsconfig. Additionally, any configuration options you want to have inside of this section over here. We're good to go there, though, and we more or less have everything we need. Did I, in this one, have my update to... Yeah, I did. So I added this little script too. Nothing too fancy. A real quick build header script. All it does is runs ng build header element --prod. If I run a script this way with my npm script section, when it does ng, it knows to look inside of your package.json. I don't have to say npx. It just knows. I could if I wanted to. I can say npx, and this is the same thing. It'll do it both ways. So I'll just run it right here. Can you get bigger? Yeah, you can like that. It'll be real quick. It'll build it in no time because it's tiny. Generating. What do you guys do when things build? When things build for me, I often try to get up and do a pace, or I run my island. I'll just pace in circle, or I'll do push-ups or something active because I go crazy when things are building. Especially some of the builds that we have in some of our big applications, they're 30 minutes. I just literally go for a walk sometimes. Build time, 30-minute walk. But sometimes when I do that, I'll press build, I'll get up, I'll turn around, I'll go for a walk, and I'll come back. And I realize that 10 seconds after I pressed it, it actually failed because of a typo. And then I cry. But not today. Today it'll be quick. Freddie, what's your build step? What do you do when things build?
I stand up get water, make coffee. But some people in the chat said browse Reddit, read articles, and code reviews, which are things that I think code reviews, that's something we should start doing.
That's probably a better thing for me to do. I'm terrible at code reviews. I think I spent like a week being like, you know what, Della? I'm going to code review every PR. And I did for that 1 week, and then I was like, you know what? Good enough. I never have to do code review again.
That's your quota.
I'll get back to it, though. I'll get back to it. I'll do another week, and I'll be quiet for like 2 months. That's my goal. Okay, so we built. Which is some nice information of everything that got built. You have a main.js file. You have a polyfill file. You have your style CSS file. You have your runtime file. All there. And, you know, what we want to do right now is we want to take a look at this actual, this built version. And we'll just play with it directly in the dist. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to actually do one of these. I'm going to say serve header, and I'm going to say npx. What is it called? I always forget. I use this thing. npx HTTP server. In fact, it even remembers it the last time. So I'll copy it. So this is another great example of me using npx. I'm not installing HTTP server in my application anywhere. I'm not npm installing it. I'm not having a global installation. I'm just calling npx right here. And Node will be like, does it exist on this folder? No, I'll just install it. I'll install it right now temporarily, and we'll use it to run whatever is inside of this folder. Which, if we look right over here, we have a dist, we have a header element, we have all this right here. Amazing. We can give it a shot. We can actually run this index file and see what happens. So look at the index file. Nothing too dramatic. It's basically the same index file that we have in our workshop. In fact, it even has this app root. But let's get that out of there. Let's say, what do we call it? Header element. That's it. And these are the scripts that it comes with. And again, the other bundles process can put this all into a single file for you. Although you probably want to have polyfill separate. Still, all there, single file, easy peasy, and it should work. So let's see. Did we save that? Let's go into package.json. Let's run you. Now I go to localhost 8080 instead. Oh, we get it. It's there. The header is there, but why aren't I seeing it? I'm not seeing any links. Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, oh, and this is before I forget. I'll jump to it real quick. I mentioned before how there were some issues with my header, and there's a limitation. When it comes to links, I found out that before we had a router link here, and router links do not play well with Angular elements. In fact, Angular elements and router and Angular don't play very well in general, because the idea of a router link is essentially saying in my parent application, I'm going to route to this place, and I can make it a single page route. However, this is now consuming header component, and its Angular application lives inside the components. It does not communicate with the Angular application outside the components, so it can't really do that routing very nicely. So if you get to this point, you might want to consider either something as simple as an href over here, although this has some caveats to kind of work around, or another clever way to route with a function call or who knows what, because router links and generally Angular router stuff can be a little bit hairy instead of Angular elements. But as you can see here, I already handled that for us. href, there, it's all working. Should be fine. And we don't actually define the links here, though. If we go back to our components, our nice header component, we need header links, right? It's an input. Well, header links, unfortunately, are not going to be an easy input. You could do this if it's a simple string, for example, and say foobar, and that would work great. Again, you can't do camel case in native. However, because we are currently living with and working with an array of objects, we have to kind of work around that right now in our native environment. And it's not too hard to do that, luckily. I'll give it an ID. I'll say ID is header LE, sure. And so let's script down here. So this script, we don't need that. Const my header is equal to, I'll make it a little bigger. Document.get element by ID. and we will pass in header ele. So now I'm getting access to this element right here. It'll give me it and reference it and put it right there. And from that, I can say my header dot header links is going to be equal to an array of objects. And those objects need, what do they need? I already forget. They're typed as, no, that's a filter. Header menu, which is href and description. Easy peasy. Href, sure. HTTPS, www.google.com. Description, I go to Google. Cool. 4 of them. I too go to Google. I don't not go to Google. There we go. We got 4 links here. And it's an array of links with hrefs and descriptions, and passing it on to a property on this header over here called header links. Let's see if it works. There we go. We have our inputs. And in fact, they are styled. I can click on them, and I go to Google. In fact, I think they all go to Google. It's magic. So we can, this way, allow ourselves to communicate with our inputs and utilize this component somewhere else in another location. And this is true for every component in this application. So I went to stage 3, but we literally have 15 minutes left. I want to leave some time for talking and questions too. So I'm going to just do a crazy thing right now and just git stash and jump all the way to stage 5. I know. We go to the slides. I skipped a lot of steps here. Well, actually, I did that. I talked about that. I did the build. I was going to go and show you in an Angular application, but don't have time for that. I showed you a vanilla application. I was going to give you time to try it yourself with advanced search component, and I think you'll have some time for that. I think it's the most useful thing, so I want to give you time to do that, if possible. But I want to talk real quick about some of the things that I did here. So you'll see over here that in this one over here, this is the header links I had before. Same thing, I'd used Google and Alta Vista. But what's more interesting is the final build I did for advanced search. You'll notice there's only the main TS and the polyfill because I used ngbuild plus. And additionally, I am listening to an event output. And that's the other thing that's really interesting. You can actually have an event be listened to on the element itself, but I forget how to do it. It's completely possible. I just literally forgot how, and I didn't have time to look into it. Another way you can do it is just getting that element, add event listener, search click the name of the event that we had before, and handle that click. You can see over here, I have give some little filter options. I did stage 5 as basically a complete, like, everything is done build, including the distribution folder, which is actually being saved in the branch. Normally you ignore it, but I didn't ignore it for this one. So you can play around with it yourself if you like. And I want to go right into, let me kind of open this up. And let me go right over to, where are we? I wanted to go right to the package.json. And I made these little serves as well. Serve header vanilla and serve search vanilla. So click on this, run serve search vanilla. Should be able to npx HTTP serve it. Go here. That one. Refresh. There we are. And you can see this is actually the search thing. It's all working. In fact, if I look at the actual properties, if I go down to the index for it, right here, I set clothes, lawn care, and electronics. All there. True, false, false. Let's make you true. Yay, it works. Awesome. And if we look at our inspector and go into the console, toolbar, do a search. Now this is where I want to mention events being slightly different. I mean, it worked. It's all there. Oh, and I must have done the filter slightly wrong. I think this is that thing I talked about before where it's an array versus an object. I kind of messed it up. That's fine. You get the gist. It's more or less working. But the end result here is that you're not getting back just this little object over here with the filters and the search. What you're actually going to get back is this whole kit and caboodle, this whole custom event object. If you ever work with custom events, you can make your own custom events whenever you want in native JavaScript. You can say new custom events. And I'd recommend you play around with this, actually. It's quite cool. And you can have anything you want emit these custom events. And you can give it some like rules about bubbling and about like how it propagates and all kinds of business if you want to. And it'll provide you things like all the event-specific methods you have, like event.propagation, event. All of these things, you know, things that are useful, and the target and the source element, yada, yada, and the path even. However, because it provides all this stuff, you don't get that clear, clean object you get normally in an event call. You have to look for it on the detail property. And so because Angular automatically handles this for you, it takes your outputs and turns into custom events under the hood as a part of that step over inside of our, if you go, for example, into our header module over here. This step right here, this create custom element step, it's doing under the hood for you. It's taking that output and it's already wrapping it in a custom events. You have to consider that with whomever's consuming this application. Let them know about that. Let them know, make sure they know the right contract, or else they'll get stuck. So I wanted to give you all time, if you wanted to work on it. There's 8 minutes left. I also want to answer any questions you had. There's one right now. So how about this? If you all want to, please try to write it out yourself. If you don't want to, I'll give you a quick walkthrough of the Angular JSON that's slightly different for the advanced search. Where is it? You are the header one. Here's advanced search. So you'll notice I use ngX build plus browser. It points to the same with the config. It's not super important. Everything else is more or less the same. The one thing that's slightly different, though, that I love about this is if you go into the package JSON, you will see that fun little command. That's not available in native Angular compiling, but it's available inside of the ngBuild Plus, where you can automatically take those multiple files you get normally and smush them as much as you can into a single file. Nice and easy, especially for something like this, where you want to have a nice, simple, easy file that you can deploy or share or put on a CDN, wherever you want to. So yeah, feel free to play around with this or just hold down stage 5. I think I pushed it up, actually. I don't think I got that local. Let me stash. Just in case it did. Oh, I didn't push it up. Now you've access to stage 5. I was hiding it behind the scenes just because I don't want you all to see the very final thing until the end, but it's the end now. So I think I had a Q&A question I didn't answer yet. Great question. Deepak asks, are there any downsides like bundle size in using Angular for creating web components versus using lit elements? Absolutely, there are, let's say, costs associated with this. What ends up happening with Angular, although this got significantly better, so much better with Ivy. I actually looked at this myself. I opened this up to see how tiny this was. This is the entire bundle, which may seem like a lot, but this is not very much. This is the advanced search in one bundle. It includes the entirety of the requirements of Angular. All of Angular that it needs is inside this file. So with Ivy, you can get the Angular bundle, those like the Hello World base minimum Angular bundle, to be something significantly smaller than you could beforehand. So because of that, the cost has gone down significantly in creating Angular elements that are like this, essentially. However, to Deepak's point, something like lit elements, or I think even, what did I use? Stencil. Stencil.js, I think has slightly better bundle sizes. And, you know, I'm not going to be picky. All frameworks are made equally in my mind. They're all beautiful. They're all wonderful. However, you might want to consider your current context. If you're living inside of an Angular environment and you're working with an Angular application, you know, you're, I don't say your hands are tied, but Angular elements are nothing to sneeze at. It works fantastically, and it's great for what you need. So don't worry too much about the bundle size, especially after Ivy. It's gotten a lot better. I have another question. Should you go towards Angular elements or modular federation with Angular? Modular federation is so new. I know it's Webpack 5. It allows you to use modular federation, and I barely know what it is. Let's take a look together. Let's learn together here. Module federation. Webpack, the concept. The motivation behind modular federation. Multiple separate builds should form a single application. These separate builds should not have dependencies between each other, so they can be developed and deployed individually. This is often known as micro frontends, but it's not limited to that. Okay, so it's essentially the idea of kind of the micro frontend, like, you know, pattern, and the idea of even what we're talking about right now, where you want to often create these separate bundles of your application into smaller pieces that are somewhat agnostic as to how they're used, but have these APIs that communicate amongst each other. I think that's fantastic. And I think that modular federation, if it's all about creating this process in any application to kind of break it into chunks, is something you should absolutely look at. And it doesn't have to necessarily be separate from what you're doing. I don't think modular federation lends itself immediately to creating Angular elements. But if the goal that you have right now is to break up your application into these smarter chunks that are built separately, that can be built separately and can be worked on separately and communicate well with each other, then modular federation is great. Although I think it's still super duper new. So warning there. I think it really needs Webpack 5. Webpack 5 modular federation. Yeah, it's still like the articles you can see are like 2021 or like this one probably when it's beta 2020. So if you're uncomfortable with things that are super duper new, maybe hesitate. But if you're like me and you don't care and you like to break things immediately and make your whole team like regret putting you on a team because you're bringing in things that are way too new, absolutely jump into it. It's cool. It's probably going to be a very valuable way to move through things. But the one caveat is, if the goal is to create this bundle that is shared in other non-Angular contexts or other applications overall that are even just vanilla JS contexts, you might have better luck with Angular elements unless you can find a nice build path in your module federation that wraps a section of your component and builds directly to web component, which I'm sure is possible, but I haven't seen it yet. We have 2 more minutes for questions. I've been talking a lot, and I talk a lot in general, so feel free to, well, no, you have to listen to me. This is what this whole thing's about, so you can't tell me not to talk. But do 2 more minutes, and you want to ever hear me speak again your entire life if you don't want to. So over here, I'm reading all the chat stuff. Browsing Reddit. Yeah, browsing Reddit, especially the /web development sections, that's actually beneficial for your work. So I'm on board. When you're building, do it, absolutely. And this is an interesting article someone shared. I'm going to click on it just so people can see it. Oh, and we got one more question too, so I'll jump into that next. And I think my Chrome crashed again, so maybe I won't jump into it right now. I can't do too many things at once at this point. My computer breaks, but I can answer this question. Let's see. Will Angular elements work fine in micro frontend architecture and consuming elements in different apps of micro frontend? So I think the question is asking, yeah, my Chrome crashed. So will Angular elements work fine in micro frontend architecture and consuming elements in different apps of micro frontend? Yeah. So I think, yeah, absolutely. We on our end, in our minor projects team, we are working towards creating a nice, elegant micro frontend architecture using Angular elements, and it works completely fine, no problem. And you know, it can be used in outside of micro frontend architectures. It can be used in all kinds of contexts, and basically any consuming application that's using it doesn't need to be in a micro frontend. Either it could be a micro frontend or non-micro frontend. You can do it in so many different ways if you really want to. But because micro front ends really lend themselves well, or almost require either iframes or web components, and I'd really say, because it's so much easier to interact with a web component than an iframe to use a web component, that it's a great way to utilize micro front ends, Angular elements, if you're working with that. But you don't have to, and you can mix and match. You can have like the application that's you're actually writing be a micro front end that creates and builds into little pieces and gives you a component that's then consumed by an Angular app, a React app, who knows what other kind of app that's not one of those. It's just somewhere else. Or even if you really wanted to, make this something you share on NPM as a third-party library and have anybody consume it any way they want to. And on that note, it is now 7 p.m. or I think it's, 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. I don't know what time it is in the actual, I think 5 p.m. And we're done. You guys were all fantastic. You will all really 1 a.m. Somebody is here at 1 a.m. I don't deserve 1 a.m. That's way too kind. But thank you.
That's dedication.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you all for coming out. Freddie, thank you. And please share your thoughts and words. I want you to have a chance to have the final say for once in your life, other than me.
No, I think first and foremost, like, thank you for to everyone that attended. Thank you, Michael, for kind of putting the post and also following up. Thank you, Della, for giving me the opportunity to help you. And this is a very interesting topic that I think a lot of people will benefit from. Like, we definitely did. We didn't, at the beginning, we were kind of doubtful as well. But as we start diving in more and more and more, you can kind of see like 3 hours is not enough to go through a lot of things we've done. And there's still a lot more that we weren't able to share. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe in the future, we'll be able to like fully share it. And yeah, once again, thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank all of you so much for coming out. I wish I could talk more about how to like deploy and share and different contexts to use this in, like in a React application and an Angular application. There's so many different things to talk about here, but overall, it was fun. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure there's more out there that's really great to consume. This is kind of a beginner in Angular elements. There are some things to look out for and things that can really help you out with, but you're all awesome. Do you have some links you recommend about the deploy thing we did not get to? Let me see if I can pull something up real quick. If Chrome looked up real quick, I think I was reading an article that was really nice. It was deploying your Angular elements to NPM. As you can see, I have all these links I clicked on. I think this is the one that did it. Let me just go check. The very, very bottom of this one. Yes, that's the one. So this one shows you how. And it's a nice typo right here. Costume elements in disguise.
Nice.
But yeah, that's a link you can walk through and you can kind of see how to do. But I'd say that yeah, Google is your friend here. There's so much useful stuff out there, although it's still somewhat new and somewhat, people are precarious about it. There's some great links out there. And I think that's it. It's now 7:03 or 2 a.m. for Leor. It's wild. And I had a blast with all of you. Michael, do you have any last words?
You guys did a great job. Thanks everyone for attending.